Evening all. Okay, I want to address a central issue about Brexit, and I'm going to assume I'm speaking to people from different sides of the argument. I'm going to be speaking, I assume, all four of you, that some of you be leavers, some of you might be Remainers. And there's a problem with the way we're debating Brexit. Because I think there is a huge issue at the core that needs to be addressed. Now, I think Leave voters have recognised this. They've put it at the top of their agenda. It's the top reason. It motivates everything they do when it concerns Brexit. And I think for Remain, it's the thing they don't want to talk about. It's the elephant in the room. It's the thing that they're either quick to dismiss, or if they ignore it and focus on something else, perhaps this issue will go away. And this issue is about sovereignty. And I think that with sovereignty, that is the whole underlying issue about membership in the European Union and the decision to leave the European Union. Sovereignty underpins everything. Now, if you are a Remain voter, and if you are particularly of the FBPE strain, the most ardent of Remainer, you've got to address this. There's no more hiding from it. And why am I saying you're hiding from it? Well, if I look back to the campaign, now I began the Brexit referendum campaign as what I would term as reluctant Remainer. There was so much about the EU I didn't like. I didn't like the way it worked. I don't like its structure. I don't like the federal superstate idea. I certainly don't like Jean-Claude Juncker and Guy Verhofstadt. I think they're loathsome individuals as human beings, and I think their political ideas are rotten as well. But the thing is that I was prepared to stick with it at the start of the campaign, because perhaps there was a chance of reform within the EU. And two things happened during the campaign that pushed me to vote Leave. And let me just say this, before you start accusing me of bigotry or stupidity, or that I've been manipulated by the Russians. Okay, hear me out. The thing is that I have some questions. I had some issues. If you were a Remain supporter, right, I was the kind of voter that you could have won to your side had you addressed my concerns, but you never did. And I remember about 3 days into the campaign, I was accosted on the street by a Remain campaigner. He was outside a tube station in London, and he was trying to get my vote. And I said, I've got this issue at the centre of it. I don't like the idea of a federal European superstate that is run by an unelected EU Commission. I said, what is Remain going to do to address that issue? Because I think a lot of people in the country are worried about losing United Kingdom sovereignty and becoming a province in a European superstate. And this guy said, I don't know anything about that. But think of the student opportunities, think of the work opportunities, think of the money we'll lose. And I said, well, I can't talk about that until we talk about the future of the United Kingdom as a viable, independent nation. And he refused to talk. And then eventually, after a few minutes, he just wandered off. He refused to talk to me anymore. And I found this. I had other Remain campaigners sort of knock on the door and canvass, and I'd put it to them again. What are we going to do? If we remain in the EU, can we keep our sovereignty? Is there a plan? Is there a plan to fight Juncker's vision for the federal superstate? And they refuse to answer. Think of the money we're going to lose. Think of the hurt that it would cause to our academic institutions. Think about scientific research, the negative effect Brexit would have on them. And I said, but I need to know. And I asked my close friends who were Remain voters, and they were badgering me on Facebook. You've got to vote our way. You've got to vote our way. And I said, okay, but here's my concern. And again, nobody on the Remain side would talk about sovereignty during the campaign. If you're a Leave voter and this sounds familiar, please let me know. And they refused to talk about it. I looked at the public debates, and they wheeled out the great and the good, Richard Branson, Gary Lineker, all these politicians, David Cameron, George Osborne. And it was in Britain's best economic interest to remain within the EU. Yeah, best economic interest. But what about sovereignty? if it's in our best economic interest, what are we trading off? What are we giving away for this supposed best economic interest? And again, none of them would answer. Nobody on Question Time, nobody being interviewed on This Week or the Daily Politics or on any of the news shows. They would not address this. And then I still needed answers. So I went to the European Union. They have a very informative website. And there's Guy Verhofstadt's book. I can't remember the title, but I didn't buy it and make him richer, and I didn't read a copy, but I got hold of a copy, and I flicked through, and I saw his interview with Evan Davis, where Davis, for once in his life, took a kind of Eurosceptic interviewing tone and really grilled Verhofstadt on this book and about the questions of sovereignty. And Verhofstadt got, he does that kind of... He gets really indignant and petulant whenever you question him, and he starts squirming, and it just feels like he wants to punch whoever's doubting him. And he's a loathsome individual, in my opinion. But I looked at the EU website, and they've got this document there called the 5 Presidents' Report. And if you haven't read it, do give it a go. If you are a Remainer or a Leaver, the 5 Presidents' Report is the core of what the EU in its current form stands for. Yeah, and it's probably stood for this for a long time. But now I've got to give hats off to the European Union. They've stated exactly where they see the EU going, and that is a political and economic union, complete, 100%. It's not. People say it's a federal superstate. It's not even federal because so much will be centralized. The nation states, as they exist at the moment, would become provinces. They wouldn't even become states as in the United States of America or in Australia. They would. There's so much centralization, and by the year 2025, the aim is to have full economic and political union. This is a 5 Presidents' Report. This is a report designed for the 5 EU presidents and for the Commission. And it maps it all out. It's interesting that democratic reform on the list of priorities in the 5 Presidents' Report, democratic reform is quite low down. In fact, the creation of a European armed force ranks higher on the list of priorities. And since the Brexit referendum result, it's now gone to the top 2. Juncker came out and just sort of bumped it up from position 4 to position 2 on the list of priorities for the EU. I mean, this is what drove me away. This is what drove me into the arms of leave. And we have to do this. If you're going to try and convince me that we have to have a second referendum, or that we should overturn the referendum result and just use this as a kind of advisory and say, hey, okay, public, 17.4 million people, you've told us what you think, how sweet, but we're actually going to remain in the EU. No, we have to deal with this sovereignty issue. And if there's going to be further debates on this, I'm not going to engage in it until we talk about that first, because that's the first thing. It's the concept of the United Kingdom as a viable independent nation state. And not just the United Kingdom, every single 27 members of the EU have to have this debate as well. And this is why the EU have increased their powers through stealth. They don't like asking people, because they know what the answer is going to be. And I think this is why, pardon me, I think this is why Remainers refuse to talk about sovereignty, because they know what the answer from the majority of the British public will be. And I think a lot of people who voted to remain in the EU last time, when I've spoken to them, and I think this is also reflected amongst Conservative MPs who are in favour of remaining in the EU, that somehow we can change it from within. We can reform the EU from within. We can make it a loose confederation of cooperating nation states who keep their independence. But if you have a look at the EU, you look at Juncker, Verhofstadt, Martin, Selmayr, Michel Barnier, they're not having any of it. The bottom line is it's a fully integrated, unified superstate, or it's just a federal unified. There is no alternative in their mind. And so we've got to address that. And I don't think we can reform it from within. But I want us to talk about it. If Remain have a plan for keeping the UK sovereignty whilst being members of the EU, let's hear it. Let's hear this plan. Okay, and if you think that no, we should be a province in a EU superstate, articulate it, say it. Ken Clarke has almost got there. He's almost, but he said, "Oh, we pull sovereignty on so many things. What is sovereignty?" No, he's got to say it. We've got to have this discussion before we talk about the academic side of it, when we talk about free movement of peoples, before we talk about the economical, supposed economic benefits of the EU, we have to talk about sovereignty. And every time I'm going to engage with a pro-Remain person, that's going to be my question. And I'm not going to move the subject on. I'm not going to have them change the subject until they give an answer, because we need this out in the open. We need to have this discussion and take it from there. Okay, Leave voters have worked this out. It's their number one thing. Sovereignty was their number one reason for voting Leave. It's my number one reason for voting to leave. But Remainers don't want to talk about it. Well, I'm putting them on the spot, and we have to. And if you're a Leave voter, don't get dragged into their economic and academic and free movement paradigms. Nail them on sovereignty. Nail it. Okay, and do they have a backup plan for maintaining sovereignty but being in the EU, or reform of the EU? Let's hear the plan, because I'd like to hear the plan. Okay, until next time, I'm signing out.